Welcome back to Munro Live. So today we have a 2024 Cadillac LYRIQ. Now, the first time we saw the LYRIQ was actually at the auto show 2 years ago, but there was such attention around it. There were so many people, we weren't really able to film or speak about it. Since then, we've been trying to get a media vehicle from General Motors. They have not been able to provide one. Now, I'm assuming, since they know what we do, they know that we put these on the lifts, we look them all over, they were worried about what we would say. Now, that's my own personal opinion, but I think it can be backed up. So I have to thank Adam from Data Driven Automotive. They provide vehicles for benchmarking companies and for other companies to be able to review and look at. So we were able to get this from him since we could not get it through the normal media vehicle channels. So I have to be honest and I have to be upfront. I am a fan of Cadillac, or more than I should say, I'm a fan of the idea of Cadillac. What it could be, what it should be, is what I hope for. However, I have been disappointed in recent years. Now, what do I say? What do I mean when I say that? Cadillac, a historic name, going back to 1903. Now, how did Cadillac get started? Technically, it was actually a swindle on Henry Ford. Ford made Cadillac, or started the development of Cadillac. But his investors did not have confidence in him, and they did not have confidence in the vehicle. So they wanted to pull out, they wanted to scrap it. They brought in a consultant to try and figure out how much value they had in the intellectual property, the tooling, the capital. Ford got mad at all of this. Well, Henry Leland, who was the consultant, reviewed it and said, look, this is actually a viable car. You can take this forward. So the investors had Henry Leland take it forward and develop it into Cadillac, not Ford. But Leland brought in more things. Interchangeable parts and precision were some of the big firsts. The first Johansson gauge block sets, the true measurement or the ability to measure tolerancing and quality, was purchased by Henry Leland for Cadillac. Cadillac, they were in a race where they had multiple vehicles driving until they got to one point. Then they had to take all of the cars apart, switch up the parts, put them back together, and continue the race. Cadillac was able to do that. Others who tried were not. That goes up to 1915 and later. Henry Leland, now that Cadillac had been sold to General Motors, had a disagreement with them on how much they were going to support in World War I. They separated away, so Henry Leland decided, I'm going to make a new luxury car, and I'm going to name it after a U.S. President, Abraham Lincoln. Well, guess what? Henry Leland did not finish that car, did not take it to production. That was then taken over by Ford. So the history of how that swirled in the past is really quite interesting, and I like it. And I like where Cadillac was positioned in that time through the history of both the automotive industry in general worldwide and also in America. They had the slogan of standard of the world. Well, they kind of stopped using that slogan, and in my opinion, they have not been where they needed to be. They have not been what they should have been. And there's a few reasons for that. And maybe we'll get into some of that as we talk around the car. Looking at this car, I think that it has a nice presence. It has a good look. The styling department drew something very, very nice. But once we get into some individual features and points, I think that the engineers, purchasing, and the supply base kind of let them down compared to what they drew. The vehicle proportions, I think, are nice. I am comfortable inside in both the front seat and the back seat with a guy of my size. Very large wheels, kind of a neat wheel. I like the two-tone. I was debating about that lower rocker, that just black lower rocker front to back. Now, I like more of a clean look, so I would have preferred the body color to go down farther. However, what they kind of do is, rather than make it look like a really fat car, it separates it out so that you're only seeing the painted line to here, and it makes it look slimmer. Going through the back of the vehicle, I have to talk about the taillights. Now, this is something that was unique to Cadillac, and there's a reason why. Harley Earl, back in the 40s, introduced the tail fins in Cadillac. Many other cars around that time kept the tail fins. Then they started to die away. But what Cadillac did was they kept vertical tail lights to be reminiscent of those tail fins, and they carried them almost up until today. There was a time, 1961, so there was an issue. Cadillacs were often converted for ambulances and hearses. And in 1962, with the tail fin and an oval vertical tail light, they were easily able to convert into an ambulance hearse. 1961, they took that oval and they turned it sideways. In doing that, they caused the conversion companies to have to create their own rear bumpers and change the tail lights in order to be used in conversion. By 1962, that went away. They went back to basically it was a light in light, but it was more vertical. All the way through the 90s, through the 2000s, you would see vertical taillights. When I drive into work in the morning, especially in the winter, it's very dark going ahead of me, and I can pick out every Cadillac just by seeing those taillights. I liked that. I liked that connection to the tail fin era. However, if you look at a CT4, CT5, CT6 now, I've been speaking and have spoke to some of the design studio people with General Motors and with Cadillac, and they were hating that they felt that their hands were tied with those vertical taillights. They wanted to change things. Some of them were actually, I had to educate them on why the vertical taillights were there. That is the tail fin. So you'll notice on those vehicles, the taillights start to look like L's or 7s, kind of an odd shape in a couple different orientations. The lower tail light here is a vertical tail light, but rather than going up the body, it goes down the body and actually hooks forward underneath the rear fender. You'll notice it has that same look, but more exaggerated or drastic on the very expensive $300,000 Celestiq. They're doing the same thing where they're having a portion of lights up above and the former tail fin now sinking down underneath the fender. I'm being critical on this vehicle because, again, I want it to be a high-end vehicle. This is about $65,000. So it's on par with the cost of the $60,000 Nissan, which was a $45,000 car they were trying to sell for $60,000, but then also that Genesis that we reviewed recently. And honestly, I think in many ways the Genesis did individual features better than the Cadillac. So let's first look at the door. We know that there was that handle from the Mach-E. There is a pull handle here, but the actual release is the door handle here. This is not a door handle that deploys. It kicks out the door enough for you to grab it and pull it open. So they provide this handle as a pull point, but then the question becomes, well, why don't I just grab the door here? Well, look at the rear door. It's the same thing. I have the handle. I don't have the handle there. I'm grabbing it. So, okay, that's a funny little feature. All right, let's get past that. Going to the inside. This is something that I have picked on several vehicles. $65,000, I'm looking at the technology that was required to make the interior. This top roll, that is just a thermoform vac formed skin. I hate that. I really do hate that on this high end of a vehicle. This should be something better than that PVC thermoform skin. We have a wrapping here, no types of real seams on that, it's just flat. Then we have a wrapped armrest. But the materials that this armrest is made of, I feel like is low quality. So basically they just took a material that is approved for one of their lower end vehicles, used a color and a grain that they wanted to use for Cadillac and put it on here. Why would you do something like that? Well, that's because the person in purchasing had an agreement with whatever type of supplier or vendor saying, as long as we purchase this amount of material, you're going to give it at this price. So that means that they get a direction to all the different program teams saying, look, we need to use this spec of material so that we get a good price. They're going to tell that to their Chevy division, and it unfortunately carries over into Cadillac. They're not allowed to use something different or nicer because they're trying to share volume. Now, that is my opinion. That is my prediction. Maybe that did not happen with this vehicle, but from what I have seen, it happens a lot. The designers, the purchasing people, they know they're high volume runners, they know their supply base, and they always end up just kicking the can down the road and continually reusing the same people and the same materials. The metal trim, the either laser or acid etched trim, this is probably acid etched here, it has a nice look to it. Now, when we looked at that Genesis, the armrest was floating. This is not floating, it's attached to the door. What's good about that is you're able to hide the attachment features a little bit easier. Your attachment features can be closer to the edge of the component, and you're able to hide the wrap on the edges, which can often look ugly. So Genesis had a higher risk trying to have more of a floating armrest with all of the different types of edging and transitions. This is lower risk with those types of features. So let's look at the front seat. Now you'll notice the wrapped portion of the front seat is actually extended all the way down to the track covers. Lots of times you would see the plastic trim wrapping around to the front edge. That would provide a hard point that is clear of the tracks. And then the actual seat vinyl material would be hidden, tucked up underneath. But they have moved this down. Well, in doing that, you have a couple of risks. Now you have the risk of having this wrap material so close to the screws in the tracks. And now you have more visibility of all those rounded edges, which can lead to quality issues, the different wrinkling and issues that you see there. I'm not saying that it's bad, but it just means that you have to take more care in the manufacturing and assembly process. You have to make sure that you have enough foam in here to fully fill it out without this type of a transition. So it's a feature that can be done and it can look very nice, but you have to know that you have to provide the time and the material in your manufacturing process to fully execute it. So there is a perforated seat insert, and we were talking about the perforations on the Genesis. Now, these are random, well, not really random, but multiple perforation sizes. But if you look at the material, everything runs all the way out to the edge. Even though there are multiple patterns within this material, it's a consistent sheet stock material, which is cut and used. So it doesn't have the same issue with all of those diamonds that the Genesis had and the positioning of those diamonds in the material. When we're looking at the seat, here's a piece of piping trim. Now this is going down in between two pieces of the perforation, but you'll see how it kind of runs out at the bottom. Now there's a reason why they do that. They're trying to bring that out of the joint seam that's coming across here. If they let that piping run all the way to the edge and then folded it and then tried to stitch it, you'd have a real big knob right there, which you really wouldn't like. Now, when I was looking at this seat, I was trying to look at all of the different pattern pieces and how they fit together and how they looked in vehicle. For the most part, it's well done, except for the wrinkling that we saw on the sides. But when I was looking at the shoulders and the total heights of the shoulders between the two seats and the widths of the shoulders between the seats themselves, I started noticing some inconsistencies there. So either the patterning is not uniform or matched between the two sides, or their sewing tolerance, which normally you'll have up to a 2mm sewing tolerance on every seam. Because of that, maybe one was a little baggier than the other, but I noticed some issues in the seat shoulders from side to side. Looking at the center console armrest, it's the same thing. This material was very, very rough. So that's the grain of the material that they selected, and also basically a PVC type material. I had to clean this because of that rough surface, and however many people have been driving this. This was really, really dirty, basically sanding on people's elbows. So this is just not as luxurious of a material that I would expect for Cadillac. When I'm looking at the instrument panel, this top pad, all right, again, that is now a thermoform skin top pad. It's not a cut and sew like what we saw in the Genesis. So this is more of a lower end execution. But they have this nice jewelry on it. Now, when looking at that jewelry, it looks very, very nice. Whoever was in the studio drawing this vehicle, they drew a very nice vehicle. The problem that I have is once it goes past the studio drawing, then it goes to the engineering execution, the supplier, the material selection, and then purchasing, identifying what they're willing to pay for, I think that's where it lost some of where it could be. Let's look at these knobs. These are the controls for the air vents. Now, this looks like it should be something substantial in your hand. It looks very impressive. However, it feels very cheap. And I don't know how much the audio picks up when I'm wiggling this around. It sounds just as cheap. So even though it has a nice look, where does it lose me? It loses me in its actual function, in its actual tactile feel, and that sound does not give me the feeling that this is a premium vehicle. So I want to open the glove box. It should be fairly simple. Now there's not a button here. Okay, there's not a button. Okay, so that means that it's in the screen. So I need to power up the screen in order to open the glove box. Now let's say I'm just at the beach or sitting in my driveway and I want to open my glove box. All right, so I need power to open the glove box. Wait, I can't turn on the power unless I have my foot on the brake. Okay, so I now have the power on. So I want to open the glove box. Why is it yelling at me? All right, I don't have my seatbelt on. The doors are open. I'm not driving. I don't need to turn on my seatbelt. I just want to turn on power so that I can open the glove box. All right, that's kind of annoying. I think this is carrying over feature as if this was a gas-powered vehicle and I was trying to shift into the drive. I should still be able to get power without having to do that. All right, I have my controls. Okay, with controls, now I have my glove box release. In order to get to that step, I think that was a little annoying, and it's still annoying with this thing yelling at me. All right, we have our center console armrest, we have our storage bin, and we have a 12 volt. Why do we need a 12 volt there? So we've had this discussion on several vehicles. Internally, I don't know if I've ever said it on camera. Why does someone have a 12 volt in their car? There's a couple of reasons, and it's mostly that there's some feature, mostly aftermarket, that they own that relies on that 12 volt. So what could that be? A radar scanner. Say someone has a radar scanner and it's 12 volt. Okay, so I would need that. But that would be in the dash. I would not have the cord going inside of my center console for that. Maybe it's a camera. I have an auxiliary camera, okay, but it shouldn't be in the center console. I don't know why. I can't think of a component or feature that would require that power there. Now, the only other thing would be for airing up tires. Let's say you have a little air compressor that runs off of 12 volt and that is now running out of the center console. That seems kind of odd too. I don't know why you would want that feature to be there. So that is a feature in my mind that marketing says I need a checkbox. I need to be able to check a box that says I have a 12 volt and this is where they decided to put it. Marketing has checked the box, but is it a feature that is beneficial in the position that they've put in your car? I would say no, but maybe some others would argue something different. I'm a seating person, and I'm a fan of Cadillac. Why am I a fan of Cadillac? For me, it is mostly to do with my own comfort. I want to be comfortable in a vehicle that I'm driving. So luxury for me is what I'm looking at. I want to see something that is very appealing. My comfort in driving on the road, how the suspension works, how I'm feeling there. I don't care about the sport mode. I don't want to feel the road. I want to just be comfortable. And then that goes back to the seat. This seat is as hard as a rock, specifically in the back. We were even adjusting the lumbar, and the lumbar mostly just felt like a fist in different areas that was pushing out on you. There was no real type of comfort or cushion. And unfortunately, I can say that I've test drove several recent GM vehicles and it was the same for all of them. I was very uncomfortable with the seat foam. I drove the Mustang Mach-E recently and that was much more comfortable seat foam than any of the GMs that I've driven recently. And that would be a challenge that I would say to GM is look at what you're doing. Lots of times there is a requirement of the thickness of foam before you hit any type of metal structure within the seat. And if they're worried that anyone is going to feel the structure, they can either make the foam thicker, but then they say, oh, we don't have the packaging space. So then they make it much more dense and much more hard. That's bad. So I personally do not like this seat. And it gets even worse when we get into the back. So when you're checking boxes for a comfortable vehicle and what a Cadillac needs to be, one thing that they're going to say is they're going to say legroom. We need X amount of legroom. I was just sitting in this front seat. I did not readjust this from where this was comfortable for me in the front, and I am still comfortable in the rear for legroom. The angle of the seat is very, very nice too. I like that. But the seat cushion, again, is as hard as a rock. I don't like that, specifically on my back. But look at this seat in the center. There is a center seating position. However, there are bolsters on the side seats that are both on the cushion and on the back. This seating position is even worse. Basically, it is just a flat pad. It does not have any of the bolsterings that the side seats have. I don't really know what they were thinking or how they thought anyone would use this seat. I sat in this seating position and it was terrible. So the center seat and the rear needs a lot more thought added to it. So there's not really a lot here that's impressive. This is fairly basic, similar to many other GM vehicles. There is a feature which is nice. We've shown it on other cars too. I don't really know what price point it would fall into, but let's say I am trying to load something in here and I need more room. I do have the ability to fold down the seats from the rear without actually having to get out, unlatch, fold them down. That's nice, but it's not really unique. So all in all, I like the proportions of this vehicle. For me as a bigger person, I am comfortable where I'm sitting. I am comfortable in my driving position. I feel comfortable having guests in my car that are the same size as me in the back seat. I like the look. They drew a very nice vehicle. Where it falls apart, however, is in some of the material choices and in the overall comfort, specifically for the seats, but then in the tactile feel of some of the different materials. That disappoints me. I would like something that's a little bit more substantial, that feels a little bit better. Again, I am a fan of Cadillac. I want the best for Cadillac. I truly, truly do. I think that this is a decent offering. I'm looking at that price point of basically $65,000. Now, this is a bigger vehicle than the Genesis, so we're getting more value there. But when I'm looking at the comfort and when I'm looking at some of the choices of materials, specifically the door uppers, the top pad of the IP, the Genesis did it better. So I would like to know how they decided to divvy up the bucket of money that's available for any vehicle, because I want to know where it really went. Is the money in the electronics? Is the money in the interface? Is it somewhere in that screen? Is it in the speakers? Maybe it just has the best speakers of any vehicle around. I don't know. But there are areas where I can see that they really cut back, specifically on the door uppers, on the IP, on some of the feel of the plastics. It left me wanting. Whereas there are other vehicles in that mid-60 price point that has all that. So Cadillac, I really, really appreciate you. I hope that you look at some of those different decisions and find out, is it worthwhile? You may determine that your customers don't care, but maybe it's the customers that you don't have yet that do care. So I would look to them. So thank you very much for watching Munro Live and the review of the Cadillac LYRIQ. If you have not subscribed yet, please do subscribe to look forward to other vehicles.